Jim Fidelibus, welcome to the Carrie Croft Show.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
I feel like I told you outside, I feel like I have a little celebrity on my hands.
Well, I don't know about that, but
like a low-key celeb.
I'm privileged to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. Okay, so there's a lot to cover. This is a juicy topic, obviously, and I told you that I've got a lot of DMs rolling in about marriage, and it's no secret that marriage is definitely something you have to work at, right?
Sure.
But for people who aren't familiar with the Gottman method, I was personally taken with it because I felt like it gave me actual things I could grab onto and understand.
Yeah.
But just really quick before we dive into sort of some of that. So John Gottman was a scientist, right? And then he turned marriage counselor. But he's got this Love Lab in Seattle, which I'm fascinated by.
Right.
Were you there at the Love Lab?
I was there at the fairgrounds. I haven't actually visited the Love Lab itself. His trainings were conducted on the old fairgrounds there in Seattle. Where that Sky Needle is?
Yeah, yeah.
Right
and he can basically tell with he has like a 90% success rate of being able to see if a couple is going to get divorced within like the first 10 minutes of their interaction together. Is that?
Yes, he makes that claim. I think he substantiates it. Yeah.
Well, do you think with all of your training too, you can kind of look at it and you probably look at a couple, and I'm sure there are things you listen for or look for in the first, 15 minutes of your interaction with them. It probably tells you a lot.
Yeah, well, it can tell me a lot about what's needed. I don't think so much in terms of predicting staying together or divorcing.
Yeah.
I'm more interested in understanding what a couple needs to help them reach a healthy decision about their relationship, and sometimes a healthy decision is to move on from each other. I would say that's not the ideal outcome, but sometimes that's what needs to happen. I would say for the most part, what I do is oriented toward believing in the couple and doing what needs to be done to try to give them what they need to stay together and make it work.
Now, are you ever looking at two people and you're like, what the hell do we have here? Or do you do that most of the time? Because, if you're going into a marriage counselor, things aren't the greatest.
Right.
So you're probably thinking in the back of your head, like, these two people crazy.
Well, I guess the things that I run into that might be challenging, certainly, I guess the one thing that would prevent any productive therapy to happen is if there was anything genuinely abusive going on in the marriage. What we don't want to do is perpetuate an unhealthy situation or a destructive one, right? Now, on the other hand, I've had spouses coming in claiming their partners were abusive, and at times I've thought that they were kind of construing things that way because they were looking for a reason to leave, Well, that's their privilege. I guess what I promote is not so much, I call myself the relationship repairman. I don't know if you've seen that on my website or not. I'm not here to save a marriage necessarily. I'm here to help a relationship move toward health. And if that necessitates a couple, going separate ways, then maybe that's what needs to happen. But really the intent and the hope is that we can grow a healthy relationship and have the marriage preserved.
Mm-hmm. In the last 3 or 4 years since COVID, have there been spikes or instances of certain behaviors and or issues that you see more than you saw before COVID? Or is it just heightened, the same things just heightened?
I don't know that I could say I've seen different issues. I mean, the standard things I will see is a spouse who seems not to have a high degree of emotional skill or intelligence, leaving another partner frustrated because they don't really feel a sense of connectivity. They feel alone in the relationship, right? So that's one situation that can be difficult. Another one is what I mentioned, not so much the abuse thing. If that's clear, for example, there's been physical abuse, it's really a contraindication. You don't want to perpetuate a marriage that if there's a true abuser involved. On the other hand, sometimes, I say often enough, couples tend to point the finger at each other and apply labels to each other that aren't helpful. Right? And the minute we get to labeling, I think what we're doing is we're cutting off actual dialogue. Mm-hmm. One way to cut off a dialogue is to throw a label at the problem.
Yeah.
And then it's over.
Right.
It just there's a demand for change, know, and rather than two people taking the time to reflect on and understand the emotional experience they create for each other, to try to get insight into each other based on how they affect each other and care about it. And I think that when you're bringing up the pandemic, I think there was probably it's one of the busiest times of my career, the pandemic.
I can imagine.
Yeah, and I mean, I had to give up my office space because of that, so I was doing almost everything virtually, but there was no gap. I mean, I was extremely busy through all that time, seeing maybe anywhere from 30 to 45, not all couples, because I do individual work as well, but couples, like at least half of that, that amount were couples coming in for help.
So what I would like to do this, because this definitely helped me in my own situation. So, and I think people will resonate out there with the 4 horsemen. I would like to go through them, and then we can just sort of see where that conversation, how long that takes and how we flow through that. So,
okay.
So the first thing you have with the 4 horsemen is criticism.
Yes.
And I'm sure we could park here and spend a lot of time on, because that's what a lot of things are, right? You're criticizing, or your spouse isn't doing something up to your expectation, or that they were supposed to do. But instead of me saying, all right, Jim, let's pretend like we're married, okay? All right, Jim, you forgot to pick up the lemons at the grocery store. Mm-hmm. It really put me in a bind. I asked you to get the lemons, and I would have really appreciated that. That's me sort of talking about a specific thing. And if like, hey, Jim, hey, dumbass, you always F up. I'm so tired of this. You're just lazy and unmotivated, dude.
Yeah. Well, those two examples you gave, I would say the first one is more of an example of a complaint, right? The second one is more of a criticism. The difference being that in a complaint, you're expressing something you're displeased with, you're unsatisfied with, it's not working for you, but you're not drawing a character judgment about your partner. When you go into the second example, it sounds to me that like there's a character judgment very definitely being drawn. You always, never, usually when always or never come up, you can count on it coming across as a character judgment. Certainly, when things get very difficult, we move into even more contemptuous language, right? Gottman would say, and I would agree, that there's room for complaining, right? But when it gets into criticism, meaning character judgments being made, you don't love me the way you're supposed to, I can't count on you, these kinds of judgments, the dialogue halts. And likely these things pair off, right? So you mentioned criticism. The next one would be defensiveness. Well, it's not like these things exist in isolation, right? Someone criticizes me, I get defensive in response. Mm-hmm. They kind of pair off, right? It's a critical defensive cycle, if you will. And that can escalate, right? It can kind of escalate into a full-blown fight, or it can translate into something more muffled but kind of prolonged, like a bickering kind of sort of negative sort of atmosphere that perpetuates, within the experience of the couple. Or the other option would be actually to approach the situation more thoughtfully, right? So when someone's being critical, they're feeling something they're not expressing. I feel let down. I feel discouraged. I feel alone, right? And when we move into the emotional reality of it, rather than the criticism, which is a cover, if you will, for that more vulnerable underlying feeling, when we move into the underlying feeling, there's an opportunity for someone to move toward that person with some insight and some compassion, caring about. There's no guarantee for that. Right, I can complain, rather than criticize, and you can still become defensive or attack me.
Right.
Just because I do it right doesn't mean you're going to. But the chances are higher, I think, that if I, as a partner, can move into more of an emotional disclosure than a critical kind of attack on you, that you're more likely to respond thoughtfully. And I kind of think the couple goes there together, right? Communication is co-created. And so with some, I guess, direction and some understanding of the principles, a couple can get on the same page, and when these things come up, learn more effectively how to work with them by not getting reactive, by creating space, by backing away when adrenaline is taking over. Usually a critical statement triggers an adrenaline reaction. And that is either fight or flight. So I'm either going to attack you back, or I'm going to shut up or withdraw. Dialogue goes nowhere, right? There's nowhere to go with that. And there are certain issues that come up that routinely get handled that way. Certain things maybe regarding finances or the children or the in-laws. You can predict that when a certain topic comes up, it's going to trigger a critical defensive kind of dynamic within the couple communication that's going to defeat any progress. And so learning to back off of the defensiveness to sort of find a clearing emotionally where you can kind of chill and regain some composure and calm so you can actually think about things together and reflect on what you're experiencing with your partner. That gets more into the antidotes. We can talk more about that if you want to.
So I do. And then, so there's something that's called, is it called the harsh startup, or how do they, so let's go through an example. I know there's so many people out there that have the same complaint. So whatever that complaint is in someone's world, like plug it in, like plug in said complaint. Like what would be one that we hear that would be an easy one to say that a wife is going to criticize a husband over? Like what's one that you hear all the time that's like a broken record?
I can't count on you to be here for dinner. I can't count on you to be with the family. You sleep in too late on Saturday mornings. I feel alone.
Well, okay, right. So, but let's the harsh startup is basically when you start a conversation in a negative way or a way that is going to just launch somebody's adrenaline and launch them into defensiveness.
Right.
The way you start that is it's going to end poorly. So for someone who's typically doing the same kind of criticism, okay, you're never here on time for dinner, I can't, what is a way for someone to step into, to change the conversation and to try to get their spouse to hear them better and not be defensive? Like, how can you start that differently?
Well, ideally, right, and there is no ideal situation. Mm-hmm. So, but ideally, what a spouse would be able to say is, I work hard for dinner. I work hard to prepare a dinner for you. We gather as a family. You're not here. It feels incomplete. It feels like there's something missing here. That you're not really part of things. Like somehow you're in your own world and the rest of us are existing in our bubble. And it's hurtful. It's hurtful. The family needs you. The family wants you, right? This would be more of a opening up of one's inner emotion, maybe even one's heart, you might say, and helping a person see the effect they're having. So if I'm a wife or the husband, because I've seen this work both ways, mm-hmm. right? And there's something that feels offensive in that respect, like you're not responding to me, you're not present to me or the family. If I come at that sort of with a frustration that's going to trigger kind of a critical, it will trigger an adrenaline reaction, and I'll get one of two things back, either a counter-criticism or a withdrawal. Rarely will it go in the direction of two people dialoguing. But if I'm willing to say, I'm hurt, I feel my efforts are not appreciated, this is important to me that we be, a family together. We miss you when you're not here. That is more inclined, I think, to draw out a dialogic kind of experience mm-hmm. between the partners then we avoid going down the path of the critical defensive block that doesn't trigger those the four horsemen, those two of the four horsemen at least. Right?
Yeah, so I think that's a good approach that you just gave. And then the antidote for that, which is the way you can respond to when someone's feeling a certain way, you're like, okay, how can I positively impact this? So what's the antidote for that is what?
Well, if we're talking about criticism.
For criticism.
We're talking about what Gottman would say is the antidote for criticism is to complain non-offensively. I don't like this. I'm not saying you're doing it intentionally. I'm not saying you're trying to hurt anyone. I'm not here to judge you, but this doesn't work for me. So I'm complaining to you about something. So he would say, and I think this is true, I don't know if it's the only way to deal with it, but in general I would say that the conversation needs to move from the adrenalized kind of place of reactivity into a reflective place where two people can explore how their effect on each other emotionally. The antidote to defensiveness is to be open to the fact I can do stuff wrong, And so, it doesn't mean you automatically agree with your spouse, but I can think about it. Maybe you've got some point there. I'm not sure you do or you don't, but I'm not totally self-aware. I'm certainly not perfect. I can think about what you're saying. We can dialogue about it. And one of the interesting things that Gottman says, and I believe this to be really true, he'll say that most couples' problems are insoluble. He calls them perpetual problems. Mm-hmm. The goal is not to solve them. The goal is to bring them into a respectful, insightful, thoughtful dialogue. And then they evolve. Anything you can bring into successful dialogue evolves. Whatever you leave out of dialogue stays frozen. It doesn't budge, right? So when you avoid a topic to avoid a fight, that might be a good temporary decision, right, for that moment. You don't want to there's no point in fighting. Fighting, I think, is it creates more problems than it helps anything. We need reflective dialogue, not fighting. Moving out of that fight-flighter response becomes critical. When you go back to you mentioned something about the harsh startup. Gottman has a category he calls a softened startup, right? In which, and his data show, this is really kind of interesting, that something like 96, 97% of the time, a conversation goes the way you start it. And if you start it out of frustration, right, you're going to come across critically. You're going to engender either a defensive or a stonewalling type of response, and the conversation, the dialogue can't happen, can't go anywhere. However, if there's an invitational approach, this means you can't be in reactive mode, right? You have to get away from the situation, calm down, kind of take a deep breath, run around the block, take a shower, do something, do 20 push-ups, whatever it takes, to get out of that reactivity so that you can approach your spouse more thoughtfully. And then the approach would be something like, there's something bothering me here. I'm wondering if you might listen to this. Is this a good time? This is how I'm feeling. This is what happened. This is how I'm feeling about it. I don't like feeling this way because it puts distance between us. I don't like feeling alienated from you. I care about you. And when there's an invitational and warm kind of beginning to the conversation, the strong likelihood is the conversation goes well.
Well, the way you just did it was like syrup and butter. I'm like, oh, Jim, talk to me, buddy.
Well,
have you ever argued with anyone in your life? You're like, well,
yeah, well,
wow. You could do it. You've got some practice.
Well, I suppose I do. Yeah.
Yeah. No, seriously, you had me hook, line, and sinker there.
Okay. All right.
So one thing that struck me, that Brady and I have taken on and really used this since being with you, is when you are in that fight or flight, your natural instinct is just to keep either run away and be super dickish or, until somebody's like uncle. But we have used that like, hey, I'm feeling that feeling right now where I'm triggered or feeling emotional. Can I have a half hour? Like, let's park this. And like when you're in the heat of it, it's like, wait, what? No, it's like, listen, remember what Jim said. Like, remember this. We did this. We said we were going to do it. Give me a half hour, 45 minutes, and let's come back to it. So it's not like you have to come back. The expectation is you're going to come back to the table, but it really does help
to take the break.
Yes.
Absolutely. And
it
I think
really does.
That's the one thing I can be most frustrated with as a therapist, right, is I can't control that. I can help people, come in and work out some of the conflicts by moving into more of a dialogue with each other, encouraging reflection, encouraging insight. But, we could have excellent therapy meetings and feel really good about what happens. If they go out and they fight, we're back to square one.
Yeah.
So I said before, ideally, the way to respond, right, is to be reflective and insightful and inviting and warm in how you begin a conversation. But you can't do that in a reactive moment, right? You can't just step over the surge of adrenaline in your system and come across as reflective and thoughtful. It's just incompatible with that. Mm-hmm. So you do need to take a pause when you're feeling reactive, and your body will tell you. Your heart rate is up, your breathing rate is up, you feel jittery, you feel a knot in the pit of your stomach. Something is telling you, don't do this.
Yeah.
But it takes cooperation, right? It takes cooperation. Two people have to agree. When we get to this state, timeout sign, take 20 minutes, whatever it is. I'll meet you in front of the refrigerator in 20 minutes. We'll go from there.
Meet me by the bike racks.
Bike racks. And it may be more than 20 minutes too, by the way.
Do you recommend, so if someone is going through, because marriage is fluid. You may be having an okay time, and then next year hits and all of a sudden you're going through some crazy thing you never thought you would. Like, nothing's predictable about it. Mm-hmm. So if someone out there right now is going through something that is more than just your typical marital argument here and there, like let's say there's a situation that conversations need to be had and they seem to be not going great.
Yeah.
Do you recommend maybe putting a time aside to say, you know what, we have things we need to talk through? Do we put a safe space time or whatever you want to call it, where an hour a week we sit down, and this is that block of time where we can just sit and address in this way, not the harsh startup, but in a soft, and this is where you can practice your trying the soft startup and really trying to do that kind of get me to hear you thing. But is that helpful to sort of, so you're both expecting it, and you can come with your concerns?
Yes. I think the difference there, I think, is reasonably obvious, right? Is that in the moment, you're in the midst of a reactive conversation before you realize it. It's not like you were planning a reactive conversation. You just feel triggered and you're caught up in it. So pausing that, right? Pausing it rather than trying to redeem it. Because if you're trying to redeem it, the likelihood is you'll just dig yourself in deeper. Mm-hmm. Learning to pause and back away. And that has to be an agreement between the spouses, right? When this comes up, this is how we're going to handle it. And it takes practice and it takes skill to do that. Learning when not to talk is a positive skill. But then what you're saying, Carrie, I think is equally important, because it's just not about not talking about something that's controversial or difficult. It's about being able to talk through it in a way that maintains a constructive dialogue. So when you're entering into a time that you've agreed on, you're entering into more consciously. You're not just getting caught up in something in the moment, right? You can't really help that. All you can do in a moment like that is stop it. But when we say like, okay, well, after dinner tonight or Thursday night or whatever our arrangement is, you're moving into that time conscious of what you're doing, so you can make some choices about how to bring things up. You can move with an intent to listen, right? And I think this is very important. Two people have to have a commitment to helping their partner feel heard emotionally, not agreed with necessarily, but
I think
heard
that's the
emotionally.
key too. You have to say that again, because that's something that was really hard for Brady and I. And I think and you would try to explain it, and it was almost like you were speaking a different language there for a minute. And I'm like, wait, so can you say that again? Because it's really important.
I think so, yeah. Being able to make an emotional connection with a person means hearing what they're saying, hearing the emotion they're expressing, right? Seeing that there's a validity in it, at least from their perspective, that you can respect, and caring about how they feel because this is a person you love, right? So we're moving in that direction. That doesn't mean I agree with you.
Yeah, and that's what we want, though. We want instant gratification of like, I'm right, you're wrong.
Right.
And so it's very nuanced, and there's a lot of gray.
Yeah.
And I guess the goal really isn't to be right necessarily as it is to be heard, and you're kind of doing a dance there where you can create that communication and understanding moving forward.
Yeah, yeah. Yes. If we can bring a caring dialogue to bear on a conflict and maintain that, we're going to figure it out. I mean, it may not be permanently resolved. As I say, when you bring issues into dialogue, the issue evolves. There may not be an immediate solution. Oftentimes there is, right? Well, let's do it this way. This is a compromise we can reach. But one way to guarantee you'll never reach any kind of compromise is either bring it up in a critical defensive manner or not talk about it at all. If that's the only circumstance in which this comes up, it's going nowhere. We need a dialogue. And that means a willingness to listen without feeling obligated to agree. Right?
A willingness to listen without feeling obligated to agree.
A willingness to listen, a willingness, I should say, to help a person feel heard. I can see what you're saying. I can understand how this feels. Or maybe, actually, I warn people against using the I understand phrase too often because we think we understand. We don't really understand until a person feels that understanding. So it's more like, is this what you're feeling? And is this kind of how it looks to you? Yeah, I'm asking questions. I'm trying to draw a person out in terms of understanding their inner emotional experience. And as I'm doing that, I'm demonstrating their value, right? I'm working at creating a situation in which you feel my intent to connect with how you feel, and it's not about agreement. It's about caring, right? And anything we can bring caring to, we're going to figure out eventually.
Okay, so we talked about criticism and defensiveness.
Yeah.
And then you've got contempt.
Well,
right?
Contempt and stonewalling and contempt are the other. Yeah, right.
So is contempt then when, for example, I have been asking you to do this one thing for me that's very important. I've asked this for years and years and years. And no matter what, I cannot get you to connect or to feel like you care about this request. And then at some point, it turns into the eye rolling, into the name calling. And because I feel like at some point, if you're asking your partner for the same thing over and over and over again, 20 different ways, and they continue to not hear you, isn't that the ultimate sign of disrespect?
I think,
or they're just dumb.
Yeah. Well, I think it's more the former than the latter.
Well, Jim, I mean, we'd like to think so, wouldn't we? We'd like to think so.
Yeah, we'd like to think so.
But that's what I hear. I hear situations, and I'm just like, sometimes things just are so simple seeming, but it's so hard for someone to hear a simple request and to actually act on it. So, of course, you're going to have contempt over time. And isn't contempt, it's very dangerous. And stonewall, I mean, it's all dangerous, but I feel like contempt and stonewalling, that sort of starts to get into like a different part of the program, right?
The way I think about contempt, right, is when you've reached sort of a generalized negative view of your partner and you're not seeing the alternative parts of them that you can actually respect and appreciate. So contempt, in my mind, I'm not sure Gottman would say it this way exactly, but it's what I've come to, is when I take an aspect of a person that I have a hard time with and I turn it into the totality of who they are to me.
That's actually, I mean, you couldn't have put that better in my opinion.
All right, okay. So, Yeah, I think contempt, the way you put it, I think is right in that I think it develops over time. But then it's a very painful thing to live with, it seems to me, because you're living under the negative view of your partner. Like the default position they have of you is something of a negative, that you're feeling generally devalued by, right? So I think that's where contempt comes from. Now, it can express itself in different ways, but I don't even think words are necessary. Just a look might be enough.
Well, let's talk about eye rolling.
Eye rolling, yeah.
Because isn't that one of the worst that you can do body language-wise?
I would suppose so, yeah.
I mean, what are some other signs of contempt that you look for?
I guess the thing that strikes me most clearly as contempt is when name-calling comes about. We could have stonewalling, though, in other words, no words, that can be contemptuous because of the inner attitude someone has toward their partner. And even though, I suppose it can be expressed in a variety of ways. I'm not sure I can sit here and say, well, this particular behavior means that, because I think different behaviors often mean different things for different people. There's nuance, but eye rolling, I guess, or like throwing one's arms up in the air, or I don't know, just turning your back on someone, walking away from them. All those things can be felt as, I think, contempt. You're not worth talking to,
Now you got a problem.
Yeah, right.
But there are antidotes for contempt.
Well, I think the antidote for contempt is to see the value in a person. I think the antidote is to say, look, I have a problem with this aspect of who this person is. But I think contempt means that aspect gets overgeneralized to the totality of who that person is. And it's important to pick out the things you can respect and value in the other person without pretending away the thing that you're having a problem with, right? That contempt, I think, is an overgeneralized view of someone based on a negative assessment of some aspect of them that you've lost proportionate you lost perspective on. It becomes an overly generalized definition of who they are to you. So you just don't want to deal with them, right? I think, things like just reactions in the moment, like you're not worth dealing with. Whatever that might look like, I guess it could vary from couple to couple, but that's what I would say generally I would view as an expression of contempt. You're not worth talking to. You're not worth listening to,
Now, stonewalling, that's never, actually, no. So one thing that I've worked on over the years that I look back on and I'm super ashamed of, actually, and I'm really happy that I don't do it anymore. I used to pride myself on being stubborn and making Brady pay. Like I would be silent. I would, I'm not going to talk to him for, X. I mean, how when you get older and wiser and you're like, time is the most precious currency we have. And how much time have I spent in my own righteousness and stubbornness? And he would try, Brady really did. He would try to pull me out of it. He more than I think most men would have put up with.
Yeah.
And I look back on it and I'm just again, very happy that I don't do that anymore, but shamed. Like I feel shame from that. Do you think that stonewalling, because to me, I feel like stonewalling is very dangerous.
Well, they're all dangerous.
They're all dangerous, but stonewalling is like, you're basically, we don't even talk, and we're going radio silent now.
Well, one of the things that you don't see in stonewalling is what the intention of the person is, because the intention can be you're not worth talking to, in which case I would call it something more contemptuous. Stonewalling can also be something like insecurity. If I participate in this conversation, if I bring this up with you, if I'm willing to talk about this, it's just going to get worse. In a way, people who are stonewalling, in certain cases, might be actually trying not to make things worse by not talking about them. Now, I don't think it works, but to see the intentionality behind it, sometimes you can attribute malicious intent when it's really a fear of things getting, out of hand in the conversation.
Could it also be, too, with, specifically, let's say a man. If a man is having a hard time being vulnerable or really expressing himself and his discomfort and his whatever in the situation, is he maybe silent because he doesn't know how to pull himself through in a safe way where he's going to feel heard by his spouse? Like, really, it's not a malicious thing or a FU thing at all. It's more, I don't feel safe to have this conversation, or I don't feel like I can be vulnerable to try to figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Again, we're talking about something, well, I don't know about again, but we're talking about something here that can have a variety of motivations to it. And everybody has a psychology, and everybody has a past, and everybody's been shaped by it in some way, you know. And so for some of us, for example, we were sort of in a family culture that subdued any kind of emotional expression, right? So we don't have the kind of cultural kind of, what I say, sort of the image, you know, in our mind of what it's actually like to be in a constructive conversation. We're fearful of it. We don't even know what we feel at times or how to say it, right? We do run across this. And a partner can look at that and say, doesn't care about me. Actually, it could be they do care. They're afraid of it going the wrong direction. It could be that. Of course, it could be contemptuous as well. So it's hard to say on a given behavior what it actually means. You have to really understand more about the specific of the couple, you know, and their own culture. But all four of these, I mean, they're called the four horsemen for a reason, right? Right. This comes out of the book of Revelation, right? The four horsemen are sort of like indicating it's the end times, right? And so if any of these four continue to, so to speak, ride into a couple's conversation, this is, I think, how Gottman knows, you know, whether a couple's going to make it or not. You know, if they're so entrenched in their dialogue going down this pathway, there's no way. Either they'll stay together and be miserable, but more likely they won't stay together.
It really is incredible how you know, it's a negotiation, it's a compromise. It's, you know, marriage is one of the most rewarding things you're going to do, but it truly is, it'll teach you a lot about yourself.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
So I have some questions too from, I told you I put the social, are you on social media? Probably not, are you?
I have a website.
Oh, no. Yeah. So I put this out on the gram, and I have some questions. So first of all, in your own sampling of couples, because there's always this thing like guys cheat more than girls. Like men are the cheaters and women are these, you know, whatever. What is your experience with that? Do you see an equal amount of cheating? Do you see more men, more women? Like, what's your angle on that?
I don't have a really a way of really feeling like I'm going to give an accurate percentage on that, but I would say that I've seen it go both ways in very destructive ways. You know, if I had to guess, I would say it's closer to even.
Really?
Yeah.
So you see. That's what I would think, because I think it's probably more of a human thing than it is a male versus a female thing.
Yeah.
Maybe the reasons are different.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I do think that's true.
Do you find that men are driven to cheating more easily? Like, does a woman have to be really taken down that road of feeling alone, isolated, starving for some sort of intimacy? Or am I just, again, following the whole narrative that I've always heard?
Well, I think that especially if the husband is not particularly emotionally literate, not particularly emotionally responsive, that it doesn't mean that a person's planning necessarily to have an affair, but something kind of shows up in a person's life that feels like it's opening a door to something you've been really hungering for, and it's hard to turn away from. And I think that might be more germane to the woman's experience, although, you know, the breakdown, we're in this non-binary age right now. The breakdown between male and female, I guess, is a little more fluid than we've ever thought about it before. So I think there's more of an equality or more of a, you know, evenness, I would say, to some of the things that we would rather traditionally think, at least in terms of stereotypes. I think oftentimes, though, on both sides, there's a sense of loneliness, there's a sense of disconnect that seems to, there's a certain hopelessness that develops around being able to kind of repair that break in a way that is sustainable. And this is where contempt can step in too, because I develop an attitude toward my spouse that, that's just not who they are. They can't do that, right? There's sort of a generalized judgment about something that sort of passes them off as incapable. So I'm not really willing then. Well, that's a door opening potentially to an affair, right? I mean, if I just have come down on the conviction that my spouse can't be there for me, why do we get married? And I'm not even sure we're talking about marriage these days. We're talking about, ongoing relationships of a committed nature. And when I can't find what I'm looking for there, the idea of companionship, partnership, connectivity, mutual attachment, these are all the things that are built into that kind of relationship that we're looking for, let's say, to be built in. When they're chronically unfulfilled, I think whether you're a male or a female, right, it's hard to turn your back on something when it shows up. And there are other circumstances, like someone, I don't know, works in an alternate city for a weekend at a time or goes on business trips. I think, that facilitates affairs happening. I think they're, again, more likely to happen when the kind of emotional bonding that should be in place for a couple that's committed to each other isn't in place. So everything becomes more tempting at that point.
Do you think people can recover, like if from infidelity, you've seen healthy
yes,
and reestablish trust?
Yeah. I'm not saying it's easy. I would say maybe 50% of the time.
Another question that came up was about the in-laws. How often are you hearing couples in counseling over extended family members?
That comes up with some regularity, I would say, yeah. It's when, my partner's mother doesn't like me or father doesn't like me, or I feel as though, somehow I don't belong in the larger family. I don't feel welcomed into the larger family. That comes up with some frequency, and that's painful. I think what it requires, right, is for a couple to come together in how they're going to deal with it. This presents a problem to the partner, the spouse, the child of the parent who's creating the problem, because it requires some detachment, I guess, right? It requires sort of a leaving and cleaving, if you will. That it's time to leave home. You may have left home, but now is really time to leave home. And establish your own separate, independent. And it's a difficult thing to navigate. I don't simply tell people, well, put your mother or father, whatever, in their place. I don't want to suggest that being unkind is what needs to happen. Maybe in some cases it needs to be pretty frank, but my goal is not to come up with solutions for this kind of thing, but to facilitate a couple being able to participate in a dialogue in which they can feel primary to each other. And they're looking for dealing with a problem, whether it's extended family or whatever it is, through the combined resources they have to bring to it. That means, first of all, establishing a sense of caring and sympathy for each other, right? That if we have the emotions moving in the right direction, the solution will piggyback on that movement. If we're trying to come up with a solution just to overcome the conflict, to push the feelings away, inevitably the feelings come back and they undermine the solution. Mm-hmm. So in my view, establishing the connection is always the prerequisite for establishing an effective correction, right? The connection precedes the correction. If we reverse that formula, I think the correction just gets undermined by the unresolved feelings. So taking the time to listen, to tune into a person's emotion, to see the validity in it, to come across in a way that if there's a caring, a genuine caring there, and that's moving in both directions. That's ideal, I realize, but I think it's achievable too. That there's not too much, I guess, that's going to get in the couple's way in the long run. That doesn't mean everything will be solved. But then, the goal here is not necessarily to solve everything, but to bring it into constructive dialogue. By constructive, I mean two people feel like, he's there for me. She's there for me. May not be just doing what I tell them, may not just be doing it my way, but I can tell they care. Mm-hmm. And when that is the experience that a couple knows how to cultivate, I think most things can be brought into dialogue, and whether they can be solved in any kind of immediate or final way, or there's just an evolution of the way they deal with it because they're maintaining that kind of dialogue, it won't stand in their way ultimately.
You're a very profound man. You know that?
Oh, am I really?
I think you are. Okay. So another question that came through was from someone who asked, okay, if you have all 4 horsemen and you've had it for 28 years, is there any hope for the marriage?
Well, if you've been having the wrong kind of conversation for 28 years, mm-hmm. I think it depends on whether you can start having the right conversation, right? When people want to get away from each other, it's often not that they want to get away from each other. They want to get away from the negative experience they co-create for each other. You don't have to change a person. You have to change your way of interacting with them, right? If we can change the dialogue, we can change the experience a couple has with each other, things begin looking different. So before I pass off any couple, what I'm looking for is some acumen, some capacity for when they're given the right information and they're given the right kind of support, can they step up to a new way of being in dialogue with each other? Changing the dialogue changes your experience of your partner. Not changing them, right, but cooperatively changing together the way you interact with each other. It's the dialogue that creates the experience. So there's still hope? I think so, yeah. I would lean in that direction. Yeah. Speaking of when you pass couples off, like, I'm sure you can think of a time where you're just like, okay, I can't help you. Aside from abuse. I mean, have you ever had a couple where you're just looking at them and you're like, okay, this is too much? There are times I felt at my limit in terms of what I could do. But I tend not to pass people off. I guess maybe that's a shortcoming on my part. I don't know. But I guess I tend to believe in the potential. I think there are couples that have withdrawn from therapy, and they've made the decision that it's not going to work. But I guess unless there's something like abuse happening, or like a serious drinking problem, or obviously abuse can be, of course, physical, but even verbal abuse can be a big problem. Unless there's something like that going on, my default, I think, is to believe in the couple and to try to help. What do you see most of the time? What are the is it financial? Is it not having sex enough? What are you hearing most of the time if you had to create sort of a common thread, like a top 3 to 5 topics? Well, the things that standardly come up, if there's children involved, it's the parenting, right? Financial, of course, is one of the big ones. Division of labor, who does what? Who's pulling their weight, who isn't? We don't feel like we're equally yoked here, Right. Is a big one. Of course, sexuality is a big one as well, right? And so there are a variety of things that can happen there in terms of problems that emerge. who you hang out with when we're not together, the extended family issues that you mentioned. Sometimes it has to do with, work-life balance, and you're more married to your career than you are to me, kind of idea. Mm-hmm. So those are things that come to mind offhand.
Because I feel like most people, you can kind of pick there's just these common things that you talk to your friends about, or that's always, it's like the guy wants to have sex, multiple times a week. You're too tired. You're doing this. You're doing that. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting to hear, because you see so many people. Like, what are the financial things that come up?
I don't. That's a pretty serious matter, right? I mean, if someone's being deceptive and stashing money away their spouse doesn't know about, there's some deeper issues there, I think. It sounds like there's issues with trust. Mm-hmm. There's issues with being able to share. If it's a partnership, things need to be shared. So I guess if I heard something like that, I would think that the problem isn't the financial issue so much as what's behind it. Because I think in a lot of ways, practical behaviors reflect emotional breaks, right? And so we look at the behavior in the context of the emotional experience, not just in isolation unto itself, so to speak, I think a behavior like that would have emotional meaning, and that's what I would want to pull forward and explore.
And the same thing if someone's spending, too much money, or
those
not being,
yeah.
Not being upfront with what, or keeping you away, like you don't really have access or transparency into what's happening there from a financial perspective. I feel like all of that can be a real big problem.
Well, I mean, a spouse might feel controlled, and so they'll reserve a certain amount of money for themselves. Maybe they get through an inheritance. They won't put it into the general fund and not tell their spouse about it, work a job on the side, and that's my money. But this reflects, I think, as I was saying, a bigger problem. I'm not saying, though, that, people can't have separate accounts and work. You work those things out according to your individual kind of preferences, and that there's nothing unhealthy about that necessarily. But I think the way it's gone about needs to be something that is a matter of consensus between the partners.
All right, so Jim, we've been here for about 60 minutes.
Oh, we have.
Which is, can you believe it?
Wow.
Time flies when you're talking about the four horsemen.
I guess so.
Right?
Yeah.
And I really think we should kind of talk to the community and do a poll. I think you could be a regular on this show, like Ask Jim.
Oh, really?
I know you're busy, but don't you think you could just come on and...
Well, I appreciate you thinking that.
Your voice is just like a soft little lullaby. So before we wrap up, though, what would your closing statement be to someone who, may want to seek therapy or feel like they may need something to kind of juice up the relationship? Would you say it's never too soon to go to come to therapy, or would you?
One of the things I heard Gottman quote is that most couples who come to therapy come about 7 years later than they should.
Okay, so there you go.
Yeah.
Right. I think there's a stigma with therapy, especially couples therapy. It's like, oh, you're in couples therapy.
Yeah.
I think it's like a great way to protect your investment. It's such an important relationship, and especially if you have kids and you're trying to show them how to be in life and have a healthy back and forth, like, why not do something to make sure that you are doing it the best way you possibly can? I see it as a completely different way.
Yeah, yeah. I encourage people not to give up on each other. If you're not meant to be together, it doesn't mean just walk away. It means understand and work together to whatever direction life needs to take you in, especially if you've got children. That being able to communicate as ex-partners is as important for the sake of the kids.
Yeah.
Who need a relationship with both parents and need to feel that that both parents are supportive of the other parent's relationship with them, right?
Right.
And that often can be a problem, and it's damaging for the children. So I think that a responsible approach, in my mind, is you can figure out a way to improve this.
Right.
Whether you discover in the process you really were meant to be together or not, so be it. Let's move in the direction of health. Create a healthy process, see where it takes us, is the idea.
Damn it, I love you, Jim.
Well, thank you.
I really do.
Carrie.
I mean, you really are. You're something else, aren't you? You know what? We're going to take a poll. The people out there are going to say yes. I know it. All right, guys, if you're still following your girl out there, please follow me on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. And until next time, give each other a little grace. Try with a soft startup and not a harsh startup.
There you go.
And keep moving. That was fun.
You're too kind to me.
No, you're so good.